Okay, well, hello folks. Hope you're enjoying the story so far. Today we have chapters 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. Hope you enjoy.
Chapter 16. Thomas Gray, the Director of Homeland Security, was sitting at his desk going over the newest homicide numbers. They were still growing, and he was out of passive ideas how to curb them. His phone rang. It was Gary, his internet specialist. "Thomas, we have a real problem." "What is it now?" "I have been monitoring a viral video that started in Europe and Asia. It blows the cover off the terminal cover-up." "Can we stop it?" "Not without shutting down the entire internet, and even then there will be copies on people's phones, iPads, not to mention their home computers. It's even made the TV news in some countries where we don't have control." "Do you have any suggestions?" "At this point, we would do more damage than good trying to stop it. In my opinion, we need to get out in front of it, with our own story that discloses the facts. That way most people won't think we were covering it up in the first place." "I have a meeting with the President in a few minutes. I'll let him make the decision," Thomas said as he hung up the phone. Chapter 17. Walter stared at the face in the mirror. He looked at the gray hair, the bags under his eyes, the many wrinkles that had seemed to just appear overnight. "I look 10 years older, and I'm just starting the second year of my first term," he thought. Walter splashed some water on his face, put his jacket on, and went back into the Oval Office. He had to meet with his advisory board in a few minutes. A man dressed in solid black was sitting on the couch reading a magazine. "B, are you sure this is going to work out?" "I never said it would be easy," came the reply. "All right, well, let's get to the meeting," Walter said as he opened the door to a large meeting room that was connected to the Oval Office. Walter listened to all the normal reports without saying anything. He perked up when Thomas Gray, the Director of Homeland Security, started giving his report. Thomas relayed what Gary had told him early that morning, and had even gotten a copy of the video and played it for them. "What are we going to do, gentlemen?" Walter asked. Everyone at the meeting had learned early on not to say anything stupid or funny, so they were all silent. Finally, Thomas cleared his throat. "Short of shutting down all communication and declaring martial law, our only option appears to be to get out in front of it and release our own video telling the public of the problem and that we are working on it." "I think you're right. I'll get my press agents on it immediately," Walter said. "How are the crime rates?" Walter asked. "Well, murder rates are still rising, but other crimes are falling drastically," Thomas answered. "How do you explain this?" "At the moment I can't, Mr. President." Walter looked toward the end of the table. "How about the overall economy?" A small man toward the end of the table jumped like someone had poked him. Yes, sir. The economy has had a steady increase for the past year and seems to be picking up steam." "And what do you attribute this to?" Walter asked. "I can't single out any one or two things, sir. It's like everything just got better at the same time." The man in black, who was sitting off to the side from the main table, enjoying coffee and pastries, chose to clear his throat at that particular moment. Walter glanced in his direction. Maybe he was right, Walter thought to himself. "Is there anything else?" Walter asked. "Yes, sir." One of the science advisors was raising his hand as if he was still in grade school. "Okay, what have you got?" "Well, Mr. President, my department has done some forecast studies, and it seems with all the recent cures that have become readily available, we will be facing a population problem in a few years." "How many is a few?" Walter asked. "Well, that depends on a lot of things. If the murder rate continues to rise, everything will stay equal. But if the rate were to fall dramatically, we could be overpopulated in about 10 years. Sounds like a problem for the next president," Walter says. "But thank you for your report." The next day, the government released its video on all national TV networks. They explained the problem and reassured the public that they had the situation well in hand. The government also gathered a dozen doctors and experts to be on all the news talk shows. Each had been given their own script, so they knew how to play their part on the issue. Some were pro, some were con. This would further confuse the public on the issue. Studies had been done that showed that the more confusing an issue, the sooner the public lost interest in it. 2 days later, the government released its hold on the internet and the rest of the media. Jeff's video hit like a flood. This further confused the public. Within 2 weeks, the murder rate had doubled. The victims now included lawyers, senators, and House of Representatives, and a few judges. This escalated to include some city and state officials. Chapter 18. Karen Roberts stood in the doorway of her kitchen, which looked out into the living room. She had a concerned look on her face. Karen was looking at her husband Earl, who had just gotten home from work and was sitting in his recliner covered with a blanket and shivering. Karen walked up behind her husband and touched his cheek. He was cold as ice. "Why don't you get out of that rat hole?" Karen asked. "We need the money, and jobs are scarce," Earl replied. Earl let out a hacking cough, and Karen's face got a little more concerned. The rat hole that Karen had alluded to was a small tire shop where Earl worked. The owner of the shop, through some misguided, old-fashioned belief, thought that if they closed their doors in the winter, potential customers would think they were closed. So the doors remained open year-round, and most of the employees nearly died each winter from colds and flu. Currently, one of the older employees was in the hospital battling pneumonia. Earl had started with a slight cough and had gone downhill for the past 2 weeks. The company was too cheap to offer health insurance, and Earl would not waste money on just a cough. After about an hour, Earl was able to stop shivering, but the coughing didn't subside. It took half a bottle of NyQuil before he was finally able to go to sleep. The next day, Karen got a call from Earl's work. Earl had collapsed and they had rushed him to the hospital. When she got there, the nurse told her that Earl was in the intensive care unit and his doctor would be out to talk to her in a little while. "Can I at least talk to my husband?" Karen asked. The nurse glanced around, then said in a low voice, "It wouldn't do any good. He's in a coma." At this point, Karen's inner strength ran out. Her knees buckled and the room began to spin. The nurse barely caught her before she hit the floor. As Karen regained consciousness, she realized she was lying in the couch in the waiting room. A nurse saw her stirring and came over. "I'll tell the doctor you've come around. He will be right out to see you." "Thank you," Karen said, still trying to regain her wits. In a few minutes the doctor came out and sat down beside her. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Roberts?" "Okay, I guess. What happened?" "You fainted." "How is my husband?" "Well, that's a little more complicated. Your husband has a severe case of pneumonia. Under normal circumstances, that's not too bad. But your husband is allergic to the normal drugs we use to treat this." "Okay," Karen said, trying to stop the room from spinning again with sheer willpower. "We will know more in 24 hours, after we see if the alternate drugs have any effect." "Can I see him?" "Yes, but I caution you. He's in a deep coma and is hooked up to a lot of equipment." "Okay," Karen said. She wasn't sure if she could even stand, let alone walk, but she forced herself up on legs that felt like jello. The doctor took her by the arm and helped her to Earl's room. The doctor was right. It looked bad. Karen just made it to the chair beside Earl's bed before her legs gave out. Karen just sat there watching her husband's chest move up and down as one of the machines pumped air into his lungs. At some point, early the next morning, she dropped off into a nightmarish sleep. Karen awoke when the doctor came in to make his early morning rounds. He studied the machines and the charts at the end of the bed. Finally, he looked up at Karen. "I wish I had better news, but your husband is not responding to the drugs." "What do we do?" Karen asked. "We have done everything we can. Now we wait and see," the doctor replied. Later that morning, Karen's brother came by. "If there's anything you need, let me know." "I know," said Karen. Late that night, Karen had dozed off into a light sleep when suddenly she was jolted awake by the sounds of electronic alarms. She looked at the row of machines. Several of them had red lights flashing. Within seconds, 3 nurses rushed into the room. One of them led her outside. Several more people, including the doctor, hurried into the room. For what seemed like hours, Karen stood in the hallway. Finally, the doctor came out and took her by the arms. "Your husband's heart stopped. We got it going again, but I'm afraid it will stop for too long. We'll do some tests in the morning, and I'll be able to tell you more." The rest of the night, Karen just sat beside Earl's bed. To the average onlooker, it was hard to tell which was in the coma. The next morning, Karen's brother was with her when the doctor called them into his office. "Mrs. Roberts, it's as I thought. Your husband's heart stopped for too long. All the tests we ran this morning show no brain activity. The support machines are the only thing keeping him alive." Karen's hand tightened on her brother's. "Turn them off," she said in a calm voice. "Are you sure, Karen?" her brother asked. "Me and Earl talked about this, and we promised each other to pull the plug if the time came," Karen said in a calm voice. "I have some paperwork to fill out first. We should have everything ready this afternoon," the doctor said. "Thank you for trying, doctor." Later that afternoon, as Karen and her brother watched, slowly, one by one, the doctor turned off the machines around Earl's bed. One machine was left on until last. After a couple of minutes, the lines on it went flat, and the doctor turned it off. "That's it, Mrs. Roberts. I thought there would be more to it." "No, that's what it looks like." "Then my husband really did die the other night." "For all intensive purposes, yes." Karen leaned over and kissed Earl, then turned and walked out of the room. Her brother insisted that she stay at his house for a while, and Karen put up no protest. She just felt numb from head to toe. A few days later, at the funeral, Stan Matthews, the owner of the shop where Earl had worked, walked up to Karen, who was sitting by the graveside, and offered his condolences. Karen felt a burning sensation in the pit of her stomach. It seemed to grow in size and intensity. Within a few seconds, her whole body felt as if it was on fire. Karen looked up at the man and caught his eyes with hers. A shocked expression appeared on the man's face, and he instinctively took a step backwards. "Thank you," Karen said. Stan was so shocked he couldn't speak. The anger he saw in this woman's eyes was nothing he had seen before. He just bowed his head and walked away. As Karen and her brother left the graveside, a man stepped from behind a tree. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Roberts." "Thank you." The man stepped forward and handed Karen a card. "It may seem strange, but this may help," he said, then turned and quickly walked away. Karen didn't look at the card. She just slipped it into her pocket. "Who was that?" her brother asked. "I don't have a clue." "He gave me a weird feeling," her brother remarked. That night, Karen was sitting in the living room. Her brother was watching TV. She fished the card from her pocket. She looked at it, puzzled. All it had was a website address. As she looked at the card, the warm feeling returned to her stomach, but not near as hot as earlier today. For really no good reason, Karen went over to her brother's computer and entered the web address. At first, she was even more confused. But as she continued to read, the meaning became clear. At that moment, the warm feeling seemed to spread all over her body. Karen decided she liked this new feeling. 3 weeks later, Jessica Matthews was enjoying dinner with her husband and 2 sons. She had just commented on the upcoming theater season when she heard a small clink sound. Jessica looked around, then at her husband, who had a surprised look on his face. She also noticed a small red spot on the front of his shirt that seemed to be growing. Her husband then slowly collapsed onto the table. He was dead before the oldest son could dial 911. Later that night, after the detectives had examined the scenes, one of them came over to Jessica. "Mrs. Matthews, we found a small hole in one of the front windows. That is where the bullet entered." "I don't understand why someone would do this," Jessica told the detectives. "We have checked for witnesses, but not yet found any. Also, the street lamps appeared to have been tampered with," the detective went on. "Would you describe your husband as a nice man, Mrs. Matthews?" "No, he was pretty hard at times." "I see," the detective said. "We'll be in touch." And with that, the detective gathered his partner and left. As they approached their car, the partner asked, "What do you think?" Another asshole shooting, the detective answered. 3 days later, as Jessica was leaving her husband's graveside, a courier approached her. "This is a very inappropriate delivery location," Jessica told the boy. "Sorry, miss, but we had specific instructions." He handed Jessica an envelope. Jessica opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. She unfolded it and read the message. "Your husband killed mine, so I killed him. Be glad I didn't take your sons as well. Teach them to be better human beings than their father was." Chapter 19. Detectives Mark Daniels and Larry Halen were waiting for their morning briefing. It had been 3 years since they encountered the first terminal killings. Over that period of time, they had discovered that if they filled out the paperwork properly and only investigated other real homicides, their supervisors left them alone. This led them to believe that their supervisors were not getting any heat either. Nobody seemed to care about the stacks of files piling up. Captain came in the room, and Mark and Larry looked up from their coffee. "First off, I have a brief announcement," the captain started. "Some of the other divisions have been cut back, and we will be getting some of their people. I am confident that you will make them feel right at home." And as if on cue, 10 people entered the briefing room, took seats along with the other detectives. One rather good-looking woman sat down next to Larry. "Hi, I'm Chelsea," she said to Larry, extending her hand. "Larry," he replied as he shook the woman's hand. The captain cleared his throat. "Okay, nothing else new, just business as usual, and stay safe." And with that he left the room. "So what unit are you from, Chelsea?" Mark asked. "I was with the Special Gangs Task Force," she replied. "Most of us here today were in that unit. They shut it down." "Was it due to not enough money in the budget?" "No. How long has it been since you went to old downtown?" she asked. "It's been a little over a year, I guess," Larry replied. "Oh, well, basically there are no more gangs," Chelsea replied. "What do you mean?" Larry asked. "I mean, they're all dead, and the ones that aren't don't show their face in public." "Who killed them?" Mark asked. "I don't have a clue," Chelsea answered with a wink of her eye. "I see," said Mark. "The narcotic division is getting cut by 50% also." "There aren't that many drug dealers left," she added. "We don't even have a graffiti problem anymore. After several were found dead with spray cans in their hands, you should come downtown and look around. The businesses are coming back. People are taking pride in their community again. It's like a whole new town." "Well, I'll be," Mark said. Chapter 20. The President said at the last cabinet meeting of his first term. Some analyst was rattling on about some foreign policy problem that really didn't interest Walter. The next analyst spoke on the economy. He reported that the economy was in better shape than it had been in 20 years. When he had finished, Walter asked, "Have you discovered the reason behind this?" The analyst grew a little pale at that question. He knew it was coming, and he knew the President was not going to like the answer. He stood up, cleared his throat, and said, "Mr. President, we have spent many man-hours and resources trying to figure that out. We finally went out and interviewed a lot of the general public." "And?" Walter asked. The analyst hesitated a moment, then replied, "It would seem that the majority of the general public just feel better." "Feel better?" Walter exclaimed. "Yes, sir. When questioned, they all said they feel better about their life in general, their jobs, even their faith in the government." "How many people did you poll?" "Over 100,000, sir." "Okay. Thank you for that report, son." The analyst sat down and realized he felt better, for he had been sure the President was going to fire him. Walter left the meeting and walked back into his office. He noticed the man in black was sitting on the couch drinking coffee. "I have a meeting with my re-election people later today," he stated. "Oh," came the reply. "I'm not sure if I really want to run again. I can think of no one better. However, this time I won't be there to help," the dark man added. "But I would have never gotten elected if you hadn't been there." You don't need me anymore. Just run on how well you have fixed the economy, and you'll win in a landslide." "But I didn't do anything about the economy. It just fixed itself." "You did more than you think. And I'm not going to leave you high and dry. Here are a few notes and suggestions on problems you might run into on your second term." The dark man handed Walter a small black pocket-sized book. "It's been a pleasure working with you, Mr. President." And the dark man held out his hand. "I don't know what to say," Walter replied. "No need. I enjoyed the coffee and pastries." And with that the dark man turned and walked out of the office. As he passed Walter's secretary and assistants, they didn't look up or notice him as he walked by.